Jimmy Fallon was telling a story. Arden Cho heard a name. Her face went completely pale. Her hands started trembling. And she whispered, "That's not possible." It was a Tuesday night in October 2023. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Studio 6A at Rockefeller Center. Another episode. Another celebrity interview. Another audience of 300 people expecting laughs and light conversation and maybe a fun game or musical performance. Arden Cho walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. The actress and singer known for her roles in Teen Wolf and Partner Track settled into the orange guest chair, smiling warmly at Jimmy, waving to the audience. She looked relaxed, happy, ready for a fun conversation. Jimmy shuffled his blue interview cards, glanced at his notes, and started with the usual opening banter. They talked about her new project. They laughed about a funny moment on set. The audience was engaged. The Roots played subtle background music. Everything was flowing perfectly. "So I heard you grew up in Texas," Jimmy said, reading from his card. "Amarillo, right?" "San Antonio, actually," Arden corrected with a smile. "But close enough for a New Yorker." The audience laughed. Jimmy laughed too, making a self-deprecating joke about his geography skills. Standard late-night television. Comfortable. Safe. "What was that like?" Jimmy asked. "Growing up in San Antonio?" Arden started to answer. Something about the heat and the food and her family, but Jimmy interrupted himself, looking down at his cards with a sudden expression of recognition. "Oh man, this is wild," he said, half to Arden, half to the audience. "I actually have a San Antonio connection I've never talked about on the show before." Arden tilted her head, curious. "Really? What kind of connection?" Jimmy set down his cards and leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from host mode to something more personal, more genuine. "This is going to sound random, but bear with me," he said. "When I was first starting out in comedy, like way before SNL, I was doing open mics and terrible gigs anywhere that would have me. I was broke, sleeping on couches, the whole struggling comedian cliché." The audience was quiet now, sensing a shift in tone. "In 1995, I got booked for this corporate event in San Antonio. Some insurance company's annual conference. They wanted a comedian for their dinner. It paid $500, which at the time felt like winning the lottery. So I flew down there, did my set, got some decent laughs from a room full of insurance agents who'd had too much free wine." Arden was smiling politely, waiting for the punchline, not yet understanding where this was going. "After the show," Jimmy continued, "I'm packing up my stuff backstage and this woman comes up to me. She's maybe in her 50s, glasses, really kind face. And she says, 'You're funny, but you're going to be even funnier when you stop trying so hard.'" A ripple of laughter from the audience. Jimmy smiled but didn't pause. "I was kind of offended at first, you know? Like, who is this lady critiquing my act? But she could see I was upset and she said, 'I'm a theater teacher. I've been watching performers for 30 years. You have real talent, but you're performing for the room you think you're in instead of the room you're actually in. Trust yourself more.'" Arden's smile had frozen. Her body had gone very still. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. "We ended up talking for like an hour," Jimmy continued, not noticing Arden's reaction yet. "She told me about teaching drama at some high school in San Antonio, about her students, about how she could always tell who had real passion versus who was just going through the motions. She said something I've never forgotten: the best performers are the ones who make the audience feel less alone." Arden's hands had moved to her chest. Her fingers were trembling visibly. The color had drained from her face. "I never got her full name," Jimmy said. "Just her first name. She said, 'Call me Eleanor. And when you make it big, and you will, remember that someone in San Antonio believed in you before you believed in yourself.'" Arden Cho raised one trembling hand. "Stop," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Stop, please." Jimmy stopped mid-sentence, confused. The audience shifted in their seats. The Roots stopped playing. Every camera in the studio turned toward Arden. What did you say her name was? Arden asked, her voice shaking. Eleanor, Jimmy said slowly, clearly concerned. I never knew her last name. Are you okay? Arden's eyes filled with tears. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the armrests of the guest chair to steady herself. Eleanor Rodriguez, she said, the name coming out like a prayer and a wound all at once. She taught theater at Jefferson High School. She wore glasses with a thin gold chain. She had kind eyes and she always said trust yourself to her students. Jimmy's expression shifted from confusion to shock. How do you know that? Because she was my teacher, Arden said, tears now streaming down her face. She was my drama teacher. For 3 years. She's the reason I became an actress. She's the reason I'm sitting in this chair right now. The studio went completely silent. 300 people holding their breath. The control room had stopped shouting. Every producer, every technician, every person involved in making The Tonight Show understood they were witnessing something impossible. That's not possible, Jimmy said, his voice hoarse. That was 1995. 28 years ago. I was 13 years old, Arden said. I was in her beginning drama class. I was shy, terrified of speaking in front of people. She saw something in me I didn't see in myself. Arden's voice broke. She died in 2015. Cancer. I flew home for her funeral. I spoke at her service. I told a room full of people that Eleanor Rodriguez changed my life. Jimmy had gone pale now too. His hands gripped the edge of his desk. She told me once. Arden continued, her words tumbling out between sobs. She told me that she'd met a young comedian who was going to be famous someday. She said he performed at some corporate event, and she gave him advice backstage. She never told me his name. She just said, I met someone who's going to make millions of people happy, and I got to tell him to trust himself before the world knew his name. The camera caught Jimmy's face. His eyes were glistening. His jaw was clenched. She talked about you, Arden said, her voice steadier now but thick with emotion. For years. Every time you were on TV, every time you got a news show, she'd tell her students, that's the comedian I met in San Antonio. I knew he'd make it. She was so proud. Like you were one of her students even though she only talked to you for an hour. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Jimmy stood up from his desk. Not the casual standing he did sometimes during interviews. This was urgent, emotional. He walked around the desk toward Arden, who was still sitting in the guest chair, crying openly. The audience watched in silence. No one knew what was happening, but everyone understood it was profound. Jimmy knelt down beside Arden's chair, eye level with her. She remembered me? He asked, his voice cracking. All those years? She had a photo, Arden said, wiping tears from her cheeks. In her classroom. It was you and her backstage at that insurance event. Someone must have taken it. You were so young. She kept it on her desk for 20 years. She'd point to it and say, this young man taught me that one conversation can change everything. I thought about her for years, Jimmy said, tears now running down his face too. I wanted to thank her. I wanted to tell her she was right. That her advice, it changed how I performed. How I connected with audiences. But I didn't know how to find her. I didn't even know her last name. Arden reached into her purse. Her hands were still trembling. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her photos, and turned the screen toward Jimmy. It was a photograph of a classroom wall. And on that wall, pinned among dozens of student photos and playbills and show posters, was a picture of a very young Jimmy Fallon standing next to an elegant woman in her 50s. Both of them smiling. Both of them completely unaware that this random corporate event interaction would echo across decades. I took this picture the week before she died, Arden said quietly. She was too sick to teach anymore, but she insisted on going to her classroom one last time. She wanted to see her wall of memories. This photo was right in the center. She touched it and said, "I wonder if he remembers me." Jimmy covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. The legendary late-night host who made millions laugh every night was sobbing in front of 300 people and countless viewers at home. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. The control room was in chaos. The show was completely off-script. They were way over time. The producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, whether to end the interview, whether this was even broadcastable. But Jimmy made eye contact with the director through camera one and shook his head. "Keep rolling. This matters more than the schedule." He stood up slowly, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out his wallet. From a worn leather sleeve inside, he extracted something small. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, the edges frayed from years of being carried around. "Eleanor gave me this," Jimmy said, his voice steadier now. "That night in San Antonio. After we talked. She wrote it on the back of her business card." He unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was elegant, slightly faded. "Trust yourself. The audience can tell when you're real." "Eleanor," Arden gasped. "She gave that to you?" "I've carried it in my wallet for 20 years, Jimmy said. "Through SNL, through every Tonight Show I've ever hosted. It's been with me this whole time. When I'm nervous, when I forget why I do this job, I take it out and read it." He held the paper out to Arden. "I think this belongs to you now. You're her legacy more than I ever was. You were her student. Her success story." Arden took the paper with trembling hands. She read the words her teacher had written nearly 3 decades ago to a struggling comedian in San Antonio. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "We're both her legacy," she whispered. "She gave us the same gift. She told us to trust ourselves. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming." Jimmy walked to his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a blue Tonight Show note card. The kind he used for every interview, with the show's logo printed at the top. "I want you to do something for me," he said, returning to Arden. "I want you to write Eleanor a message on this card. Anything you want to tell her. Anything you didn't get to say before she died." "Jimmy, I can't." "Please," he interrupted gently. "I need to know what she would want to hear from you. I need to know that our conversation mattered as much to her as it did to me." Arden took the card and the pen Jimmy offered. Her hand shook as she wrote. The cameras didn't zoom in. This was private, sacred. The audience waited in reverent silence. When she finished, Arden handed the card back to Jimmy. He read it silently, his eyes filling with tears again. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket next to where Eleanor's note had lived for 20 years. "What did you write?" one audience member called out, unable to contain their curiosity. Arden smiled through her tears. "I wrote, you were right about both of us. Thank you for seeing us before we could see ourselves. We trusted ourselves, and we made millions of people less alone. Just like you taught us." The audience erupted. Not in applause yet, in that collective sound of 300 people crying together. Strangers connected by witnessing something that transcended television. Jimmy helped Arden stand. They embraced in the middle of the stage while the audience rose to their feet, applauding through tears. When they pulled apart, Jimmy addressed the camera directly, his voice thick with emotion. "Eleanor Rodriguez taught drama at Jefferson High School in San Antonio for 32 years. She died in 2015. But tonight, we learned that 1 hour of her time, one piece of advice, one moment of seeing potential in a stranger, that moment is still alive. In me. In Arden. In everyone she ever taught to trust themselves." He turned to Arden. "Thank you for telling me her last name. I finally know who to thank. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." After the show, Jimmy had Eleanor's note and Arden's card professionally preserved together in a single frame. It hangs in his office. Above it, a photo of Eleanor Rodriguez in her classroom, surrounded by students, doing what she loved. The Tonight Show donated $50,000 to Jefferson High School's drama program in Eleanor's name. Arden presented the check herself. And somewhere in San Antonio, a new generation of students learned to trust themselves because one teacher believed in people before they believed in themselves.